Over to Kanimuli.
Thank you, Shalini. A winner is a dreamer who never gives up. Now, let me request our principal of NKCE, Dr. N. Ramesh Babu sir, who creates the opportunity for budding young minds to give presidential address. Over to principal sir.
Sir is in another meeting, so I would like to welcome our Chief Guest Malavika ma'am for accepting this invitation. Thanks ma'am once again. And I would like to thank our management who has given us or allowed us to conduct this type of program for especially for girl students to empower themselves. Okay, I think Malavika ma'am will give you some tips regarding for your empowerment. Make use of the session effectively, students. Over to Kanimuli.
Thank you, ma'am. You are women, that's your superpower. Let's end our eagerness to know about our guest of honor of this program by chief guest introduction. Let me invite Ms. Suhashini of first MBA with full of joyous to give chief guest introduction. Over to Suhashini.
Thank you, Kanimoli. Seek happiness for others. In the process, you will find it in yourself. Happy morning, everyone. It is indeed a happy morning, all soaked in the delighted frame of mind. This morning, I have the pleasure of introducing to you an amazing woman, our guest of honor, Miss Malavika Krishnan. Let us see about her. Malavika Krishnan is a psychologist with a passion for spreading awareness on the importance of mental health and building personal resiliences. She has completed a Master of Science in Psychology with a specialization in clinical psychology from Jain University, Bengaluru. She is currently working as a therapist partner with a CurveFit and finds gratification in bringing a sense of empowerment through the therapeutic process. She was awarded with the title of the Best Oral Presentation at the 12th Paris International Conference on Marketing Education, Humanities and Social Sciences for the year 2018 for her research on the correlation between self-compassion and burnout among special educators in Bangalore. Malavika's other area of interest include dance, theatre, writing, prose, and traveling. Really, wow! I'm so honored and thrilled to have such an incredible. Thank you, Kanimoli. Hello.
Thank you, Suhashini. The strong action for a woman is to love herself, be herself, and shine among us those who never believed she could. A girl should be two things, who and what she wants. A woman with a voice is by definition a strong woman. If you have a dream, make it a goal. For this enthusiastic program, I welcome Ms. Malvika, Krishnan Kalpana Dance, Bengaluru, Karnataka, guest of honor to have a motivational talk with us and facilitate the gatherings. Please, ma'am.
Good morning to one and all present here today. And I would like to invite anyone who feels comfortable to switch on their cameras as well as we're talking about today's topic. And thank you so much for the warm welcome that you've given me today. I'd like to just start by talking about the topic that we're going to be presenting today is about the factor as well. So I'm going to just present my presentation right now. One moment. If someone could confirm whether the presentation is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. So, firstly, I'm going to be talking about what motivates us and what it is to be a woman in the Indian context. So, with these factors in mind, I'd like to talk about how we can include and enhance our motivation and how the current context of the women in India, especially, perhaps what are the challenges that we face. And I'd like to make this interaction a more active one, wherein I might be asking you a few questions through the presentation And these are questions with the intention of provoking thought for you personally. So this would be related to your personal experiences. And as we're going through those slides, I would like to invite anybody who feels comfortable to also unmute themselves and speak about their own fact or any points that you would like to share with us as well. Please feel free to talk about this by the end of the presentation. So we'll be spending about 10-15 minutes at the end to also talk and answer your questions too. And I'd also be talking about the factor of what happens when there is a lack of motivation. So this includes the feeling of burnout and how can we deal with that. So the first thing that comes in there is to identify the signs of burnout and what can be done to treat burnout as well. So when we come to the second slide here, we see a lot of women who are prominent in the Indian business world. We have Vandana Luthra, who's the CEO of the VLCC company that looks
I'm
to
sorry for the
well-being.
disturbance, ma'am. Ma'am, your slide has not changed, ma'am. Second slide. It is in the
Oh,
first slide.
one moment. Huh? Is it visible now?
Not it, ma'am. Ah, yes, ma'am. Yes, it is visible now.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. So here we have the pictures of various prominent Indian entrepreneurs like Vandana Luthra, Ritu Kumar, who is a famous fashion designer who has been a trailblazer for sustainable fashion in the world, and Falguni Nair. Which one of us has not looked into the online platform of Nykaa and looked for different kinds of either skincare products, makeup products, or even clothes fashions now? So, who is the woman behind this major e-commerce company? And who is Indra Nui, who is one of the most prominent board members of Amazon? These are various prominent and highly motivated women who have come about in the Indian society and have marked their territory as well as carved a name for themselves in this Indian society. So, what is it that we can learn from them? So, that is what we're going to be exploring further through this presentation. So, firstly, I'd like to ask you here, ma'am, is the slide changed now?
Ma'am, no, ma'am.
One moment. I,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, I think I'll have to be utilizing this screen. Would it be all right if we continue with this screen? Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am. Now it is
Okay.
visible.
So, when we talk about motivation, each one of us has a different idea of what is motivation for us. And these are some things that over time builds and changes over time as well. So, I'd like to invite two or three participants to talk about how it is that they define motivation for them.
Students, as answer to the question which ma'am has asked.
Or alternatively, if you want to send in your answers through the chat box, that is all right as well. So shall we move on then? Is that all right?
Girls, ask a question in the chat box.
So let's talk about what psychology defines motivation as. So when it comes to the psychological perspective of motivation, the motivation is a process that initiates, guides, and maintains goal-oriented behaviors. So we have initially what we have in mind is our goal that we would like to achieve. And how it is that we achieve this goal is to initiate action and see how we can go about it and how to maintain the behavior that will lead us to achieve our goals. And this involves the biological aspect of the physical energy that it would involve to achieve these goals, the emotional aspect about being in a state of flow or being in a state of focus while we're talking about achieving our goals, and the social support that we would garner from perhaps our institutions that we are studying in or from our personal circles. And this is a major factor that helps in maintaining our sense of motivation as well, and our cognitive forces, that is how we see the goal in mind and whether we see it as something achievable or not. And when we talk about motivation, there are three factors that come to mind. So like I mentioned, a stands for activation. So what it is that that wakes us up in the morning, or what is it they say that dreams are not the ones that you see in your sleep, but dreams are the ones that keep you awake. What it is the sense of activation that comes about when we think about our dream or our goal in mind, and what are the actions that we can take to achieve these goals. That is a major factor that comes in terms of motivation. And P stands for persistence. So the path to achieving this goal may not always be a smooth one. There might be a lot of obstacles that we face while we're talking about motivation and while we're talking about achieving our goals. So when it comes to facing one obstacle at a time and consistently jumping through the obstacle course as we're talking to to achieve our goals, that is the component of persistence. So the ability to not give up when we are facing difficulties to achieve our goals, and with the intensity. So I stands for intensity here. When we talk about spending 4 hours in completing a single task versus spending 2 hours in completing a single task with intensity. So what is the difference here? The difference is the concentration that we have, the focus that we put in terms of uh, completing the task. So when we have a single-minded focus approach to our goals, that is something that also improves our motivation in the long run as well. So I'd like to talk about the different types of motivation that come about in terms of the psychological perspective. So when we talk about the types of motivation, there are two major categories of motivation that most things can come under. So one is extrinsic motivation. So this explains the rewards that we get from our external environment that tend to influence our motivation levels. So this could include incentives such as financial rewards or gaining social recognition from your society and feeling a sense of achievement. Or another factor would be positive reinforcement. So when it comes to a simple example that we can utilize to explain extrinsic motivation, think of a child who is being told that if they get good marks in a test, they will get the phone that they wanted, perhaps. So this would be an example of an external motivation, that is the positive reinforcement that influences the child to study and to perform well in their exam. So keeping this in mind, we have very tangible or observable ways that extrinsic motivation works. If we look at it from an organizational perspective as well, there are a lot of institutions that provides incentive for good performance. So incentives such as a bonus or incentives such as a holiday trip could be another factor that enhances motivation among employees as well. So this leads to a better job performances. But the second factor is something that's a little more intangible or a little more harder to explain when it comes to self-motivation. So as the name suggests, intrinsic motivation is the motivation that we achieve from within ourselves. So it arises from within the individual, and the reward that we feel at this point is a feeling of personal gratification. So what would personal gratification feel for an individual? So when they look at their tasks and they feel like they've performed well, without having a sense of extrinsic incentives such as the marks that they gain or the job package that they might get. what it is that brings about a sense of pleasure for them. So when we look at examples such as the human service-oriented fields, such as the doctors or even volunteers, and even for example, psychologists who are counseling. So what is the reward that they gain at that point of time? And this is something that is more intangible, as it is not something that you can gain from the external environment completely. It stems from within ourselves. So what I'd like to do is, as we're going through the slide and talking about motivation, the extrinsic motivation is something that is more observable. So that is a little easier to identify as we're going about. And it's easy to also build the sense of motivation from our external environment when we recognize the incentives that we're getting and how this is influencing our motivation. But what is a little difficult to understand is the sources of motivation that come about from within ourselves, and over time, what it is that allows us to feel motivated. And that is something that I'd like to dive into with this presentation. So, one important factor when it comes to understanding intrinsic motivation is that it requires a lot of introspection. So, introspection is the ability to monitor our feelings, our thoughts, and understand ourselves by this monitoring process. The intrinsic motivation is when we think back to our previous experiences while growing up as well. What are the factors that inspire you? So, this could be anything to experiences that you have had, or books that you've read, or activities or role models that you've seen. So perhaps, for example, a person who wants to become an actress may be somebody who has watched a lot of movies and who's been inspired by their role model or from the actresses there as well. Or alternatively, they might be a person who's enjoyed traveling so much that they've started to get inspired and motivated to create a business that is oriented towards traveling. And currently, if we look at the current scenario where there are a lot of uh, people who are working through social media as well, and what it is that inspires them, and how they've monetized on that as well, and taken that motivation to gain their income from their passions. So, what it is that they did is that they've noticed that this is something that brought about a sense of motivation towards themselves. And what I'd like to also talk about is how we can address this in our own lives personally. So this comes from a lot of self-reflection. So when we reflect upon ourselves to see what experiences did I enjoy? And in my personal experiences, I would like to share my own personal experience with this is when what it is that interested me in psychology in the first place. So what I noticed while I was growing up is aspects such as perhaps the show of detectives wherein they observed people's behavior and how this helped them predict their behavior as well. So then I understood that interested in something related to the behavioral sciences. And from that, what are the other factors that gave me a sense of energy as well was to listen to people as they were talking about their own life stories. And this is something that I understood while I was also talking to people were close to me. So another book called Jumpstart Your Motivation by Doyle. He talks about talking to people who know you very well. And when you talk to them, the question that you can ask them is, what do you think that I would be good at? And when I asked this question, the answers that I was receiving were that you seem to be a good listener, or you seem to have a sense of compassion when you talk to people, and you have a presence that can help people feel safe enough to confide in you. And keeping these factors in mind, I noticed that perhaps these are some of the strengths that I have. Build on them further, and then this is something that will help me decide my profession. I would be interested in the application of psychology in the form of therapy and providing that space for people to talk about their stories, to talk about their experiences, and give them a sense of being non judgmental at that point in time as well. So, in this way, we can also understand how our own purpose in life is something that will help influence our journey in the future as well. And I'd also like to talk about hedonistic versus eudaimonic pleasure. So this is something that comes in from the area of positive psychology. What are these factors firstly? So hedonistic pleasure talks about short-term pleasure that is gained from immediate gratification. So what this means in a real-time example could be if an individual feels like having pizza for the lunch, so they would immediately order one and then have that. So the pleasure that would take in enjoying that pizza instantaneously is something that is called hedonistic pleasure. And one of the characteristics of hedonistic pleasure is that it is a short-term pleasure. What this means is that it doesn't last longer than the time that you've enjoyed having the pizza. So if you think about 2 days later, the feeling of enjoying the pizza may not stay as long. So it's the short-term pleasure versus long-term pleasure, which is what eudaimonic pleasure talks about. This is something that helps in maintaining a sense of motivation for the long run. So what eudaimonic pleasure is to identify what are the factors or actions that we can take that contribute to a sense of purpose that we have. So this is something that wherein we're talking about giving back to society and giving back in a way that helps society grow as a whole. Keeping this in mind in terms of how we talk about our own personal experiences here, for me, I'd like to share my personal experience with how eudaimonic pleasure talks about uh, a delayed sense of gratification. That means that the gratification may not come immediately. It may come in after a certain point through hard work. So a sense of talking to clients and talking to through their life stories and what is bringing about stress for them, but up to a point where there might be come to a point where they've come through a breakthrough. And here, a breakthrough is a point where an individual understands the guide, the direction that they can go in order to help their mental health. So the feeling of watching a client go through that breakthrough may be something that brings about a sense of pleasure at that point of time. So even though it's a delayed gratification, this is something that lasts for a longer period of time as well. So coming to the next slide that we talk about here, this is something that I'd also have inspired from the book that I mentioned here, Jumpstart Your Motivation by Doyle. And he talks about 10 foundations for motivation and what it is that can help us in the future as well. So the major part that he starts with is talking about having a purpose in life. So what is read and gets you to act upon it in the long run. So this could be wanting to build some institutions that provide employment for people, or it might be a sense of building institutions that will help in either education or help in providing sources for people in different parts of the world or in different parts of the country itself. And this is the reason that you would have to work towards the long run in the long run. And when it comes to having a purpose, once we identify a purpose, what it is that we can do next is to have a passion to work towards this purpose as well. And how we can build this passion by identifying what gives us pleasure in the long run as well, acting upon this pleasure, and also the third important foundation for motivation is to have a learning or growth mindset. So what this means is that there is a factor that comes about when you want to continue learning even beyond our formal education. So when even after gaining our degrees, gaining our qualifications, being motivated to upskill ourselves as we go through life, and talking about learning from any factors. Learning may not be limited to just textbooks or courses online. It also could be learning from the people that you interact with and learning from the experiences that you have, even if it's not related completely to your profession. And the fourth important foundation that Sean Doyle talks about is to be a mentor or have a mentor. So, in our initial stages of life, having a mentor and identifying who this mentor could be is a very important factor. So, if we know what our longer or long term goals are, we also can observe people who have already achieved these goals. And this can be done by reading about them, their autobiographies, reading up on them, or watching their videos or interviews to learn about their life story. And the best way to learn if you want to achieve a goal is, so this can take a lot of trial and error, but it is also a way to quickly learn faster as well. And once we've come to a stage where we also learn what we can, is to also bring in a sense of contributing back to society by being a mentor to somebody who was in the position that you were not so long ago. And the fifth factor that comes about that Sean Doyle talks about is to understand what are your motivating factors. So these are key to help you know when you're in a feeling where you feel like a lack of motivation. How would you go about motivating yourself again? So this could be by having a new experience in a new culture. And as we go about this journey, there will be times where you would feel that you're not recognizing your own achievements. And one way to acknowledge the progress that we've made through time as well is to reinforce our achievements and reward ourselves for our achievements as well. This will help us recognize us, and this will further motivate us to keep continuing the process. And Sean Doyle talks about long term thinking. So, this includes even 30 years down the future. What are our goals in mind? How do we picture ourselves 30 years in the future? These are the questions that we can ask ourselves that help us understand what it is that we want in out of life. What is our purpose out in life is how we want to achieve or contribute to society. And what it is that we want out of life is going to help us keep motivated as well. And through this, also evaluating ourselves periodically, asking ourselves a question of, am I in the right direction right now? Or are there ways that I can shift my direction in order to keep aligned with my long term goals? And also, Sean Doyle talks about a sense of having a balanced life. So, having a life where we work for 24 hours a day may become something that leads to burnout, leads to a lot of stress within ourselves as well. So, in order to avoid this feeling of stress, what can we do? We have to ask ourselves at this point of time, what is it way, or is the ways that I can take care of myself and make sure that I maintain a balanced lifestyle? What are the things that I enjoy doing that don't involve work and reduces my feeling of stress? Because if we continue and emotional resources, so to avoid running out of resources early in life, we need to maintain a balance. So I would highly recommend us to read this book called Jumpstart Your Motivation by Sean Doyle, because he goes in depth into these 10 foundations for motivation. And this is a good way to also go in depth or read other books that are related to motivation and see what works for you individually. So next I'd like to talk about motivation in the context of the Indian woman. And this is something that we as women on during the month of March, that is considered to be International World Women's Day, what it is that you feel is different for women when it comes to our motivation. And this is something I'd like you to answer through the chat box, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, that you can answer about it as well. Please feel free to share your thoughts. and your personal experiences as well.
Students, you can put your questions in the chat box. Let this be an interactive section.
So while I was researching about motivation in the Indian context and what it is that motivates our women entrepreneurs specifically, is that they all have a high level of motivation, self direction, internal locus of control, and achievement. So, self direction here is that they have the ability to direct their actions towards their goals and they have the ability to gain the support to move towards their goals as well. And I'd like to talk about the locus of control here initially. So there are two styles of locus of control. There's the internal locus of control and the external locus of control. So the internal locus of control is a feeling that the individual has that they are in control of their own actions and they are in control of their own thoughts and behaviors. So what this means is that they understand what are the factors that are within their control and what are the factors that are coming in from their environment. So keeping these in mind, they're able to also take action based on what are the things that are within their control. And this leads to them achieving their goals. And what happens when it comes to the motivation in the Indian context is that in our society, we have grown up with different gender roles. And as a woman, traditionally, the role of the nurturer or the woman who stays at home and takes up perhaps the actions that take care of the family has been a very prominent role as we've seen in our Indian context. But what happens when it comes to motivating ourselves to build an independent identity? What does it mean to have an independent identity? It could be that they have their own purpose in life. They have their own reasons to go about and take action in their environment, and this is going to also help them contribute towards the social economic status of their family alone, as well as contribute to the social economic status of of the whole country entities and being having that sense of contribution to the others. So this is also something that connects to the eudaimonic purpose of life as well. So when it comes to the challenges that we face as an Indian woman, what in terms of the the motivating factors that come into the picture? So I just like to start with the gender roles that come about. So even when we talk about our infancy, at the infancy we are assigned a particular gender as a male or a female. And when it comes to the expectations that a child would have in terms of their behavior, how many times have you heard that girls are supposed to behave this way or boys are supposed to behave in a particular manner? So girls are supposed are even with respect to the toys that we buy for a girl versus the toys that we might buy for a boy. These are some things that have been defined by society more than anything else. So even if you look at perhaps buying a kitchen set for a girl child, what's happening is that we're conditioning the girl to understand that perhaps this is the role that she would play as she grew up. And even when it comes to observing the parents' role as we grow up as well. In the current scenario, this is something that perhaps is changing over time. But as we grew up, we also saw our parents taking up a particular role in the household. So perhaps the father would be taking up the role of providing for the family, On an average, the father would be the one who would go to work for and earn a living, while the mother would be the one who nurtures the children in the house, or who takes care of the children at home and takes care of the household. So observational learning is something that also has a strong impact in conditioning ourselves to think of what is the role that we can play as we become an adult. And this is something that brings about a challenge in terms of motivating women to go beyond the gender role and to explore beyond the gender role to see what fits for them personally. And when we talk about the societal expectations that come about from this, is that even if we grow up in a particular household with a certain expectation to play a role of, perhaps as we grow into a different household when we get married, for example, at that point of time, the social societal expectations that would come about is something that can face a challenge to a woman this takes away the sense of choice for a woman at that point of time as well. So this is another challenge that we are facing as a woman. And even when we talk about our country as a whole, in terms of the access to education that is being provided to women, there is a limit to the level of education that a woman is provided. So there might be women who have been forced to drop out even at an elementary stage. And this is a huge limitation to them, as this prevents them from further gaining qualifications, even though they have the mental resources for that as well. So when we talk about self-esteem or a level of confidence, and this is something that they like to talk about in terms of self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is simply put the belief that an individual holds of whether they can complete a task successfully or not. So when it comes to a woman who has had limited access to education, who has to face the burden of societal expectations as well, there might come a time where women have a lesser sense of confidence or self-efficacy to achieve their goals. So even if they do have the mental resources that come about, so they might have the intelligence, or they might know how to go about starting a new business, perhaps. But the factor of confidence or self-doubt is something that prevents them uh, from even taking up the step. And when we talk about the financial independence, I'm so sorry. When we talk about the financial independence that a woman faces, so if at this point of time there is a lot of challenges that a woman might face in terms of understanding financial aspects. The role of managing the finance in a household has been something that has been taken up by the male gender for most parts on an average. But when it comes to the women of the family, when it comes to the financial awareness, if that is something that can be built for women, that also is something that can help combat the challenges that they face when it comes to the independence. So this will also help in providing perhaps the initial investment that the woman would need to start a business. And from there, it also takes us to the organizational environment that we're currently facing. When it comes to the glass ceiling effect, the glass ceiling effect is the perception that women are gaining opportunities in an organizational environment, but only to a certain level. So if we look at the higher positions, perhaps the CEO level or the CFO levels of major companies, the percentage of women that are actually taking up or given the opportunity to take up these roles are fairly limited compared to lower managerial posts as well. So this is a challenge that is being faced because of the bias that is being faced, that women are not capable of taking up these roles, even though there might be evidence to show that she is capable. So when it comes to the challenges that we're facing, how do we address these challenges? So I'd like to talk about a bottom-up model for this, where we talk about the personal level. So what does the personal level look like for us? So this is our own individual thoughts that come into the picture of introspection is how do we speak to ourselves with respect to my role as a woman? Do I think that my role is also present to take up the gender roles that have been enforced on me? Or are there factors that I can utilize or build my sense of confidence to take up roles that I would like to take up, regardless of the gender that I am? And this is something that we talk about in terms of our own internal dialogue. The second level here is the interpersonal level. So this is the dialogue that is brought about when we talk to our social circles. So this could be how you speak to your other friends in the classroom as well. So when we discuss factors about the gender roles that you're playing, what are the biases that another woman might be having that we can also talk about and also bust the myth of the thought process that they have. And what we're doing right now is is considered to be at an interpersonal level, where we're having this presentation to talk about motivation for women, to also encourage women to take up their roles that they would like to take, regardless of the societal expectations that they're facing. And at a larger level, at large scale level, this would be considered at the macro level, where we're talking about the society as a whole. So this includes the whole movement of feminism as well, right from the history where women fought for their rights to vote to currently the fourth wave of feminism, where we're talking about feminism for people of different regions, different countries, and talking about how the UN addresses feminism as well. So these are the ways that we can challenge and talk about including ourselves in this movement of feminism, to combat the challenges that women face, especially in the Indian context. So when we talk about motivation, I'd also like to address a feeling of lack of motivation. So how do we know when we're feeling completely demotivated? And what is it that we can identify? What are the identifying factors of demotivation, or what we call burnout? So burnout is considered to be a high level of demotivation that prevents an individual from performing in their expectations. So this may stem from a long-term time of continuously putting in work for say 14, 15 hours a day, until the point where you start to feel a sense of fatigue. So what are the signs of a burnout that we can identify? So the first sign is doing. We don't feel like there is a sense of purpose in the work that we're doing. Or physical signs of burnout could be the whole body feeling a sense of tiredness, fatigue, could be headaches or stomach aches, or feelings of anxieties that comes about when we talk about work as well. And emotional exhaustion is the sign that comes about when we feel like we can't put in the mental energy to complete a task, even though previously this task is something that was feeling pretty simple to complete. Or noticing a change in how we address a task. So procrastination is another factor that comes into picture as a sign of burnout. Is if it's something that you felt that you've been able to achieve before, but right now I don't have the energy to complete it. And the change in the quality of performance. So we talk about how previously we would expect ourselves to perform, say, at a 90% out of 100. When it comes to feeling a sense of fatigue or burnout, we start to reduce our performance level as well. So we might be achieving at perhaps 60 or 50, 65%. And this leads to a sense of frustration, because before we had a higher quality of performance, but because of the burnout that we're facing, there is a reduced performance level as well. So this becomes a cycle in terms of how that affects our burnout as well. So how do we treat burnout? What are the ways that we can use to increase our sense of burnout as well? So one of the best ways to talk about it is to communicate your feelings to your personal circle. So to seek support from your personal social circle by telling them that you're facing this right now. You're facing this sense of fatigue or tiredness, and I would like to take a break, for example. So taking a break from the work in order to rejuvenate yourself. Another way, if there is a situation where it's difficult for you to take a break from the work, another way to address it is to reframe your perception of the work in itself. So what this means is that you search and you find the value in the work that you're currently doing. So how is this going to be useful in the long run for you, or how is this going to be valuable to the society as a whole? And when you're feeling this sense of burnout, another important factor is to recognize and implement the boundaries when it comes to the work level that you're doing. So initially, you might have said that you'll be working for 10 hours a day. But when you're going through burnout, it would be immensely exhausting to work that many hours. So, say I'm going to cut down my working hours to 6 hours instead. And after that, I'm going to do something else because I need to take care of myself. And that also goes into the next point that I'd like to make about setting aside time for your self care routines. So, what it is that you can recognize that gives you a sense of relaxation. It could be going out with your friends, it could be going out for a trip, or it could be even watching your favorite TV shows or reading your favorite books. That could be a sense of self care routine for you as well. And through this, if this is something that is still you're finding difficult to work through, seek professional support. So what this means is that you can also seek therapeutic support from people online through online consultations, or if you could also talk to your organization that you're working in and ask for a break from there, and so you can talk to the manager or the HR at that point of time. So this brings us to the end of my presentation about burnout, and at the end of the presentation about the sense motivation and motivation in the Indian context as well. So I'd like to go to the interactive session where we have, if there are any questions that I can answer through this platform. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask me now. So there's a question from Srimati. Thanks for the amazing session. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Could you please suggest us some tips to stay self-motivated? Yes. So when we talk about self-motivation, one of the major factors that would help is to identify what it is that motivates you. So when we experience that sense of motivation, and what is your environment like? Who are you speaking to? Are you speaking to somebody who is also very motivated? Or are you doing a task that is keeping you motivated? Or are you also in an environment that keeps you in a motivated factor? Are you perhaps studying at home? Or if you're in a session with somebody, or if you're even talking to your friends about certain goals that you have in mind. So keeping mindful about when you feel motivated, and from there, these are the key things that you can do when you start to feel less motivated. Does this answer your question? Thank you, Srimati. Are there any other questions? So I just like to thank the institution for providing me with this amazing opportunity to talk to